Hello! Welcome to my video essay about 2024's Vancouver trip for Grade 11 Environmental Science. The purpose of this project is to explain how the trip helped me learn and understand the topics taught for this course and how to show this course is important and applies to the real world. The trip lasted 6 days. Here's a brief summary of what we did every day. Tuesday was the day we arrived in Vancouver. Once in Vancouver, we went to the Vancouver Lookout viewing deck, the port, and the white spot. At the viewing deck, we looked at the city of Vancouver from high up. We saw things like mountains and rooftop gardens. From the rooftop gardens and the many bike lanes, we could see right in front of us ways to make the city greener. We also went to the gift shop and bought souvenirs. After that, we had almost 2 hours for a lunch break. We then walked by the water and looked at yachts and waterplanes. Next, we checked into the Holiday Inn. For dinner, we ate burgers at the White Spot. On Wednesday, we went to the University of British Columbia power plant, campus, and botanical garden. The power plant, we learned how they make energy, do research, and ensure safety. On the UBC tour, the most notable parts for me were the Zero Emissions House and the Tallwood Building. We learned that Tallwood buildings are fast and sustainable, but supply chain issues are making it harder to build more. After that, we ate lunch at the Kitsilano Beach area. Then we went to the UBC Botanical Garden to see plants and go for a canopy tour. We learned that Tallwood buildings are fast and sustainable, but supply chain issues are making it harder to build more. After that, we ate lunch at the Kitsilano Beach area. We went to the UBC Botanical Garden to see plants and go for a canopy tour. We went to the gift shop. Next, we went to the beach and waited. For dinner, we had spaghetti at the Old Spaghetti Factory. Thursday, we went to Science World, Stanley Park, Granville Island, Basil Pass to Bar, and laser tag. At Science World, we were free to go to any exhibit as long as we went to Earth Matters. At Earth Matters, we learned various things related to environmental science, such as how much water is used to make different things, and how trees absorb carbon dioxide. At Stanley Park, we had a tour with an Indigenous guide. We learned about Indigenous culture and the uses of plants in the forest, such as cattail, which is used to clean teeth. At Granville Island, we had lunch and went shopping. Then for dinner, we had pasta. After that, we played laser tag, which included free-for-all teams and zombies. On Friday, we went to Grouse Mountain, Capilano Suspension Bridge, the Fish Hatchery, and Bowling Alley. At Grouse Mountain, we went by gondola, then were free to do what we wanted. There were grizzly bears, the owl talk, the lumberjack show, and the birds in motion show. At Capilano Suspension Bridge, we had our choice of a few activities such as crossing the bridge, doing the cliff walk, and doing the treetop trek. At the fish hatchery, some people just did the hiking loop and some people saw the dam. At the dam, we learned things like how to keep a healthy stream. For dinner, we got $20 to go to any restaurant within the boundaries. The bowling alley was our evening activity. On Saturday, we went to the University of British Columbia's organic farm, Lynn Canyon Ecology Center, and a cathedral. We got a tour of UBC's organic farm. There we learned about various studies and ways they farm sustainably. I will talk about that more later in the video. At the end of our visit there, we went to the farmer's market. At the Ecology Center, we had a tour of the forest. We learned how to identify shrubs and trees such as the Douglas fir. We looked at a fern, leg, pine cones, and more under a magnifier after our walk. After that, we walked around the museum/gift shop, which had information about wildlife. For lunch, everyone got to pick a restaurant to go to. For dinner, we went to Original Joe's. After dinner was when we went to the cathedral. The plan was to attend Mass, but instead we took a group picture outside because the cathedral was locked. On Sunday, we went to the BD Biodiversity Museum in Gastown. Then we went to the airport to go home. At the BD Biodiversity Museum, we had a tour and learned about evolution and biodiversity. The museum has 2.2 million specimens. We did an activity in which we chose a taxonomic classification and filled in a worksheet with things like a biotic interaction and where they appear in the fossil record. After that, we had a few minutes to look in the gift shop. For lunch, we went to Gastown, which is a historically important place for Vancouver. We went to the airport so we could fly back to Ontario. Every day of the trip, we did reflections at the end of the day that included what we did and our rock, stick, and leaf. Rock is what rocked, stick is what stuck with us, and leaf is what we would leave behind. Oh no. Rock is what rocked, stick is what stuck with us, and leaf is what we leave behind. One of the locations we visited was the University of British Columbia's Botanical Garden. We had a guided tour and we went on a canopy tour in the trees. This related to course content about the effects of climate change, plant requirements, soil, ecosystems, climates, and thinking of ways to care for the environment. We saw how different plants have different needs, such as how dry they are and what nutrients they get. We are told about how trees perform photosynthesis in their leaves to create glucose and oxygen. Usually canopy walkways are nailed to the trees, and this harms the trees. But at UBC's Botanical Gardens, they use something called a tree hugger system. Instead of walkways being nailed to the trees, there are cables around the trees. The trees are not harmed and they are left room to grow. This relates to thinking of ways to care for the environment. This method of protecting trees is creative and effective, which is the kind of thing we strive to accomplish with our assignments such as our personal energy audit. The tree hug method also relates to our learning about the conservationist, preservationist, and developmentalist approaches. The tree hugging method uses the conservationist approach because it allows humans to enjoy and use nature while having as little of an effect on it as possible and using it sustainably. On a tour of the Botanical Garden, also related to when Our tour of the Botanical Garden also related to when we learned of climate in our first lesson about environmental science. Our tour guide told us that the ocean wind sweeps over that area and creates a microclimate. This climate is moist, which is important for many plants. It is also the reason some plants do not grow there, as different plants live in different climates. For example, a desert cactus would not be found in Ontario. This is because plants have adapted to their environment to get the right amount of moisture and nutrients for them. We also learned that BC is a temperate rainforest, which relates to our course content involving climates as well. In temperate rainforest, there are many different biomes. This is great for a big garden that hosts a lot of plants. Having all these different biomes means there are plenty of different conditions for plants to grow in, and that there's a lot of water for these plants. Relating to our lesson about soil, we even saw a hydrangea plant that was blue. Hydrangea flowers change color depending on the pH of the soil, which is how acidic it is. If the soil is acidic, in other words, its pH is less than 7, the flowers are blue. Soil with a pH of 7 is neutral, and hydrangeas there will have purple flowers. When the pH is higher than 7, we get pink flowers. Here in Ontario, soil is generally basic, so most of the hydrangeas here have pink flowers. The plant we saw at the Botanical Garden had blue flowers, so we can note that the soil was acidic. It is one thing to hear about this on screen, but it is an entirely more exciting thing to see it in person and recall the information for yourself. Something else in the Botanical Garden that relates to our course is certain plants that grow up the slope. This relates to our assignment about plant requirements. These plants grow up the slope to get to different soil and because it is drier up there. Another thing related to climate is the reason for the trees there being so tall compared to at home in Ontario. These trees were able to get so big because in BC there's a longer growing season and the winters are not harsh. This leads into something that relates to climate change, which is the fact that winters are getting harsher with the changing climate. These harsher winters change the conditions that the plants grow in. This also changes things for animals, so it changes the whole ecosystem. Like in our course, we learned about ecosystems. Our tour guide at the Botanical Gardens told us how each layer of the ecosystem works together. For example, the canopy is a layer of the ecosystem there. It protects from too much rain and provides shade. Protecting the ground from the rain is important because too much rain causes soil erosion. Shade matters too because it keeps water in the ecosystem as there is less evaporation. The more complex the forest, the more ecosystem services it provides, like oxygen and food. Relating to our course content regarding climate change, we learned that climate change has caused there to be more forest fires. BC has been combating this by using prescribed burning. Preventing forest fires helps protect the environment because forest fires lead to habitat loss and smoke blocks sunlight. We also learned that plants often grow in decaying tree stumps to get moisture and nutrition because the shallow soil in the forest does not hold enough moisture. This relates to our learning about soil and our learning about plant requirements. This experience solidified my understanding of these topics from the environmental science course because I saw the concept we learned in action and I could make connections myself. I learned the concepts while doing this on the course, but my solid understanding came from recalling this information myself on the trip. Seeing everything in person and presented in a different way made it more memorable than things are when they are only learned at school. These things I learned are relevant to people's everyday lives for multiple reasons. Learning about climate there could inspire us to learn about our climate, how it is affected by climate change, and how to protect it. If we grow plants at home, we now know that our plants require a different amount of sunlight or water, and they might better in a different type of soil. The tree hugging method reminds us to check for ways we unknowingly harm nature, and it inspires us to think of new and creative ways to prevent this. The second location I will be talking about is Science World. There we went to the featured exhibit Earth Matters. This exhibit greatly related to our course content about climate change. Even when we were walking outside, we saw things made of reused materials. Within the Earth Matters exhibit, many smaller parts of the exhibit that taught the users about climate change and the environment through interactive games. I will tell you about some of the ones I did. This game was called Threatened Species, and it taught me about how the endangerment of species has increased lately. The game is a matching game, and when you match the same species, it told you about that species. The next game I did included learning about the natural water cycle. We learned about freshwater as an important research which related to our lesson about water conservation. Only 2.5% of water on Earth is freshwater. The game part asked, how thirsty are things? I used a water pump to pump 16 gallons of water. Then the screen told me that all that effort could only produce water to make 4% of a chocolate bar. This really put in perspective how much water we use, and that we use so much water for everyday thing. There are other objects I could have picked too, such as apples and smartphones. This helped me understand how much water we use, and I comprehend it much more than I would have from a usual class because it was interactive and I saw it for myself. In the exhibit, there was also a collaborative wall of ideas. These prompts relate to our course content involving thinking up ways to help the environment and reduce carbon footprint. There were little hexagon whiteboards we could put on the wall beside the prompts where ideas to get people to appreciate organisms under their feet, eat local food, get to know local wildlife, and travel by public transport. This idea was mine, and this idea was from someone else. These ideas get put in the recordings for the reflection zone, which I went to later in the day. After sharing my idea, I went over to the Sweaty Trees area. There I learned about how trees store carbon, transpiration, and how forests help create reliable rainfall patterns. Rainfall patterns relate to our lessons about plant requirements and climate. Trees storing carbon relate to our lessons about emissions. Transpiration relates to the water cycle. The activity at the station was an animation of why trees absorb carbon dioxide. It told me that CO2 is a greenhouse gas, trees absorb it through their leaves, and it is used for photosynthesis in the leaves. In photosynthesis, plants make glucose and oxygen out of carbon dioxide, water, and energy. This is why plants require CO2 and water. The oxygen is then released into the atmosphere, and the sugar molecules are used for cellular respiration, which we learned about. The sugar is also used for growth and repair because the chains of their connected molecules strengthen the tree. Most of the carbon atoms are stored in the tree until it dies, but some of them leave the tree through cellular respiration. My next activity that I did was the reflection zone. Here people put their heads in the clouds to hear voices talking about their visions for Earth's future. This relates to our course content about climate change and thinking of ideas to combat it. Remember the hexagon whiteboards from earlier? Well, these also get put in the recordings for the station. It is nice to feel like people will hear a generation's voices regarding climate change.
Say 25% plus 8% plus 8%, 30-something% of all of our...
After reflecting, I went to the Arctic Sea Ice Station. There I got to see how it has receded over the years. This video shows Arctic sea ice from 1920 to 2017. As you can see, this is a striking difference. This relates to our learning about climate change and water conservation. Well, at this part of the exhibit, I remember my research from the Climate Change Canada assignment. The next section of the Earth Matters exhibit I went to was the Banksia woodlands. From the sign, I learned that the Banksia woodlands is a fragile and endangered ecosystem. The sign told me that 60% of this environment has been lost. It lists urban development, agriculture, weed invasion, groundwater extraction, severe weather, disease, and invasive species as the dangers to this ecosystem, most of which we discussed in our course. The activity for this was a room with projectors in which we got to see all of the seasons and many animals and plants. We got to experience right in front of us how beautiful and diverse this ecosystem really is. Finally, I went to electric innovation. Here I learned that 65% of the world uses fossil fuels for making electricity. We learned about fossil fuels in our class. The sign also told me that most of this goes to waste, but microgrids are more efficient and sustainable. They're small electrical grids. This activity involved by power a model neighborhood. This station made me think about sustainable ways to generate electricity. Learning things in an interactive and engaging way solidified my understanding of what we learned in our course about climate change. The learning environment at Science World was very fun and collaborative. I also felt free to do and learn about whatever interested me instead of having to follow a plan. It was also nice to feel like I could relate what I was seeing in this fun environment to what I had learned before, to really make the connection between things and understand them better. This was relevant to our everyday lives because the different ways of learning could help people understand themselves and their learning style better. This exhibit, especially the reflection zone and the hexagon whiteboards, can let people know that they are not alone in caring about the environment, and there are people they can share their ideas with. The lessons about climate change are important to everyone because this is a global issue that is bad for everybody. Issue that is bad for everybody. This information about climate change is especially great at Science World because it is accessible to all ages, which is important because it is up to the current generations to make a difference and for future generations to maintain and improve that. Another interesting place we went to was the University of British Columbia's organic farm. There we had a tour with Sarah, the farm ambassador. She told us that the farm was built by UBC students and protected from having condos built there. The farm is used for learning research in the farmers market. They even have a practicum program to help young farmers learn organic farming and get placed somewhere safe. Fun fact, the farm is 60 acres. This tour helped our understanding of plant requirements, protecting the environment, soil, organic farming, and greenhouse gases. The part I found the most interesting was when we were told about UBC's study that evaluates greenhouse gas emissions from 4 different soil types. This study is important because 4% of greenhouse gases come from vegetable farming, as Sarah told us. To find out how many greenhouse gas emissions are coming from the soil types, there are greenhouse gas chambers that open and suck in the greenhouse gases from each soil type. We learned about greenhouse gases in our course, so this directly relates to it. This part of the tour stuck with me because it felt like people were making a real difference, and it was so cool to see something that could change the way people farm all over the world. Something that related to our learning about ecosystems and plant requirements is the different methods of farming within the farm, particularly in one of their 3 indigenous farms. In this area, the crops are not planted in rows, so they are more integrated. The uses for the plants are arranged in a shape similar to a flower. The indigenous people's reason for this is that the plants are like that naturally in the forest, so why would we make them grow in rows? In our course, we learned about organic farming. We learned that organic farmers do not use pesticides unless necessary, and if they do, they are not chemical ones. At UBC's farm, they do not use pesticides at all. They have 2 ways to protect their crops from pests without the use of pesticides. The first way is cover cropping. Instead of leaving unused fields empty, they plant a bunch of different plants together. This brings pollinators and decreases soil erosion. Their second method is crop rotation. They change which crop is in that field every 4 years. They use crops that replenish the nutrients that were taken from the soil by the previous crops. This also relates to our soil lesson. Relating to our task about plant requirements, we learned about why they use hedgerows, which are a shrub. Hedgerows act as a wind barrier and they have lateral root systems. Their root systems help with water retention, which is important because the soil drains quickly there. This relates to our soil lesson. Another study we learned about was a study they were doing about how artificial light affects bats and insects. They observed the effects white light has compared to amber light. This is so they can be better for animals. The third study that Sarah told us about was their study to see if it is possible to grow black truffles organically. For this study, they chose English oaks because of their root systems and because they have root hairs for nutrient retention. To find out if the truffles have grown, they used dogs to sniff. This study could help the future of organic farming. Relating to our course content about soil and plant requirements, we talked about the Mayan style of farming with the 3 sisters. This is one of their 3 indigenous farms. The 3 sisters are beans, corn, and squash. They use these crops together because they help each other grow. For example, the beans and corn have shallow root systems, so the soil can erode, but the squash is at their base and holds them in place. The combination also works out well for the nutrients in the soil because corn uses a lot of nitrogen, but beans replenish that as they are nitrogen fixers. At UBC's farm, they work hard as they are nitrogen fixers. At UBC's farm, they work hard to protect the environment. They do not use pesticides, they are organic, they educate people about what they do, and they do studies to learn how they can improve. This experience taught me even more about the things I had already learned in online school. This tour gave me a sense of hope by showing me things we had talked about in action. Watching a video about organic farms is helpful, but having the opportunity to see one in person and ask a professional any question you want is truly amazing. An example of a way this farm expanding my learning was the study about greenhouse gas emissions. From our course, I knew about greenhouse gases and I knew that there was ongoing research about them, but seeing this study show me a specific example and show me exactly how the ongoing research is happening. Seeing how things work at this farm is important to our everyday lives because now we understand how organic farms are better for the environment and what reasons. So, as consumers, we can make more educated decisions when buying groceries. We also were inspired to always look for new ways to improve how we do what we do. We learned to be open to different methods, like how the farm has multiple indigenous farming areas and has learned from them. We also now know more information to help us take care of plants that we are growing at home. Take care of plants that we are growing at home, such as different types of soil and how some soils drain faster. This journey to Vancouver was super fun and educational. I gained insights such as seeing environmental initiatives in action, such as many rooftop gardens, bike lanes, and compost bins all over the city. I got to learn about ecosystems while being in them. I had the opportunity to see how people are figuring out ways to protect the environment. My overall experience was a super interesting 6 days that I will remember for the rest of my life. This trip was so worth everything for the friends I made and the things I learned. It is a very unique opportunity that I feel extremely lucky to have had. This video essay assignment deepened my understanding of environmental science because it made me recall the things I had learned, look through my notes, and make connections to the real world. Thinking about things that relate to environmental science made me apply it in different ways and use the information I had in my head, creating a more complete and profound understanding. The assignment helped me understand environmental science's significance better as well. I thought about what I learned both online and in Vancouver, but unlike other assignments, I thought more about why it matters and relates to real life, and not only about the information itself.